to I.N.SANE's Asylum. The Doctor is in. Sane. In the day, I'm featuring Hellraiser Part 1. The first of 9 installments featuring Pinhead the Cenobite, the only reoccurring Cenobite in all the movies. Sometimes Chatterer is a reoccurring Cenobite, but not the same Chatterer throughout all of them. Like in Part 4, he plays a dog, and Part 5 is just a torso. Anyway, this involves Chrissy Cotton, her father Larry, his girlfriend Julia, and Larry's brother Frank, who's escaping hell and trying to escape the Cenobites. Anyway, now I'm going to head on to the spoilers. So if you don't want to see any spoilers, stop this video now. Alright, the video begins with the merchant selling Frank Cotton a box and asks him what's his pleasure. Frank Cotton slips 2 bundles of dollars to him, and then the merchant just says, "It's yours." And then later that night we see Frank surrounded by candles opening the box, and as he's opening the box, chains on hooks shoot out and tear his face apart. And then we see the Cenobites for the first time as Pinhead puts Uncle Frank's face together, pieces of his face together on the floor, which somehow has his eyeballs still attached. And then we cut through the present, where Frank's brother Larry and his wife Julia move in. And then we cut to a few days later, where Larry's attempting to help 2 movers move a actress up the stairs, while Julia's having flashbacks about her affairs with Frank when she sees pictures of him. And as she's looking on her flashbacks of having an affair with him, Larry cuts his hand on a nail on the staircase. And apparently he can't look at the wound himself, but when he enters the attic, he drops some blood on the floor. So as Julia and Kirsty, Larry's daughter, take Larry to the hospital to get stitched up, we then see Frank slowly, and we see some slime getting together for him and putting Frank back together. You see his arm bones coming out from under the floor, and then sort of like his head's getting put back together, sort of like his neck reattaches to his head. And then we go from later that night, where Larry and a couple of friends, along with Kirsty and her roommate Steve, are all sitting around the table having a good laugh. Julia excuses herself from the table. She goes upstairs, and then she sees Frank for the first time, all disfigured. And then Frank's trying to ask for her help on bringing him back from hell. Julia resists at first. She kind of thinking about sacrificing Kirsty, but kind of does nothing, so Kirsty is kind of wasted, and her and Steve get ready to leave. Then later at night, Julia, remembering that she said she would do anything for Frank, just to have another round with him, and she goes into the attic and let Frank know she will help him. And then Kirsty has herself a nightmare where she walks up to a stretcher that's bleeding, and she pulls the blanket out, and then her dad Larry sets up. Then it's sort of like Steve wakes up noticing Kirsty's having nightmares, so Kirsty calls up her dad and sees if he's alright. The next day, Julia invites a man over and then beats him to death with a hammer, so Frank can feed off of him, and then Frank's able to walk again. Kirsty's at her job at a pet store, and she sees a vagrant eating some crickets, and she makes him leave. Then sort of like Steve then approaches her, and then sort of like she looks again where the vagrant was standing, and the vagrant is missing. Back at home, Julia brings another guy home and then hits him with the hammers to sacrifice him to Frank. And Frank gives Julia information about the box and about the Cenobites, about his exploration through hell and back. Later at night, while Larry's watching a boxing match, Frank's running back and forth upstairs and bumps into the wall, and then Larry goes up to check, and Julia's trying to keep him from going in the attic. And then sort of like Larry actually checks and he assumes it's a rat, and then they show all the rats nailed to the wall. And then sort of like Julia gets Larry in the bed, and then it's sort of like Frank kind of walks into the room, and then Julia thinking he's going to kill Larry. She begs him not to, and Larry thinks she's begging him not to make love, but we then see Frank just cut it back off of a rat and then walk back out. And then the next day, Larry's talking to Kirsty in a restaurant, asking Kirsty if she would spend some time with Julia. And when she's getting ready to head over to the house, she sees Julia bringing in another victim. Kirsty goes up into the attic, and then she sees the victim and attempts to reach out to him, and then Uncle Frank comes up from behind and then traps Kirsty into the room, and then brings on one of the famous lines of "Come to Daddy," with that eerie look in his face. And then Kirsty throws things at him, and she attempts to throw the box in, and Frank tells her not to. And realizing Frank is obsessed with the box, she throws it out the attic window, runs out. He looks at that window and kind of distracted as she runs out the door, gets the box, and runs off. But then passing out, she wakes up in the hospital, and sort of like the orderlies tell her not to get up. Then they want no information on the box because she was holding on to it. Then she starts puzzling around with the box and opens up a tunnel through hell, where she then enters. She runs into a scorpion-like character. It has a scorpion tail, not sure what the face is supposed to be of it, but chases her out, and she closes the box before it can get through. Which, by the way, this character is called the Engineer. Anyway, she messes with the box some more, and then the Cenobites come. First, Chatter comes out, and then kind of sticks some of her fingers in her mouth to keep her from talking. Then Pinhead Female, aka Deep Throat, and Butterball will show up. And then Kirsty kind of brings up he has done this before, and then Pinhead confessed he has done this millions of times. And then she brings up her Uncle Frank escaping. So Pinhead kind of says they want to hear it from himself. So then Kirsty goes back to the house to try and warn Larry, who, by the way, Uncle Frank already took his skin. And unaware that it's actually her Uncle Frank, Larry apparently says he killed Frank. And then Kirsty doesn't believe this, and then she says she wants to see him, and then Larry at first insists, but then tells Julia to show her. So then she sees the bones of Uncle Frank. And then the Cenobites appear, and Pinhead tells her, "We want the man who did this." And thinking that it was her dad doing that to Uncle Frank, she wasn't willing to sacrifice her dad. But then she runs out of the attic, and Julia keeps her from leaving the house. And then she runs into Larry, trying to calm her down. And then he says, "Come to Daddy," in that creepy face. And then she realizes it's actually her Uncle Frank. She attempts to escape him. Julia holds on to her. and he takes a stab, and he accidentally stabs Julia, and then drains on Julia, and then says, "Nothing personal." And as Kirsty tries to hide, Frank then finds her, and then it's sort of like she backs into the attic, and then she realizes that's her dad on the floor. And then Larry says, "Don't," Uncle Frank says, "Don't mourn him. He's been dead before this," before we even touched him. And then she says, "Your uncle's here. Your Uncle Frank is here." And then the Cenobites hear it straight from his mouth that was Uncle Frank. So then the Cenobites, Pinhead tells Kirsty to leave the attic because this ain't for her eyes. So she attempts to leave as Frank attempts to go after her and take a stab, but while he reaches his hand up, the Cenobites had one of the chains with hooks grab a hold of his hand, and then all kinds of chains and hooks hold up to him. And then before it gets pulled apart, it says, "Jesus whelps." And then the chains pulling the bits. And then she leaves. They'll go downstairs only to run into Deep Throat, aka female. And then she runs back upstairs into the bedroom where she sees Julia's body strapped to the bed mattress holding the box. So then she grabs the box and then starts opening it. And Pinhead comes up from behind. So then she manages to trap both Pinhead and Deep Throat inside the box. And then her boyfriend Steve comes right into the house, or roommate. We're not really confirmed if he's a boyfriend or a roommate. But anyway, at least I don't think we are. Well, it doesn't see on part 2 that's ever brought up. Anyway, as Steve comes in, Kirsty's coming downstairs. She runs into Chatterer, who's hiding behind under a blanket for some reason. And then she ends up trapping Chatterer into the box. Then she runs into Steve, and then she sees Butterball's trying to come up from behind, but then the ceiling falls on Butterball. So it's not confirmed that Butterball ever went back into the box, but he does appear in the box again in part 2. And then sort of like she had the box closed, but then Steve is trying to unlock the door, trying to get out, and then Kirsty accidentally opens the box, thinking that the hell was going to be on the other side of that box. Steve gets the box open, only for just all black out there and no thing. And then the engineer comes towards them, and then Kirsty fights the engineer over the box. She closes the box, closing off the engineer. The engineer is never seen again, at least not that one. And then Kirsty and Steve burn the box. And then the vagrant from the pet store earlier grabs the box and gets caught on fire, and then he transforms into a dragon skeleton and takes off with the box. And then it appears the box is back to that merchant from the beginning, who's asking an unwilling customer, "What's your pleasure, sir?" And then the credits roll. Now on to my Mr. Static ratings, aka the stars. Alright, due to the fact it took over an hour for anybody else to open the box other than Frank at the beginning, and summon the Cenobites, the main characters we pretty much came to see. Now, if I seen this one before the 2 following sequels, I would probably have a different opinion on this. But since I did see 2 and 3 before this one, I was kind of disappointed it took forever to get the Cenobites summoned. So on behalf of that, that's kind of a down for me. But I do love the story of this movie very much. So with that, I give it 3 Mr. Statics out of 5. That's all for this episode of I.N.SANE's Asylum. The Doctor is out.